welcome to my channel. I'm continuing the series on bike setup, and today we're going to talk about the one part a lot of people don't really think all that much about or think is very important, and that part is going to be the saddle. Yep, that is the one part that I think most, and I'm going to specifically target mountain bikers with this, don't really think about, and maybe commuters in general, people who ride bikes that aren't like super serious about it, but mostly mountain bikers. If you ever talk to road bikers, they're kind of ridiculously nuts about what they have for a saddle, and there's a reason for it. So let's talk about that. So over here I have what I call takeoffs. Bike shops have takeoffs, things like that. These are the stock saddles that came on some of the bikes that I have. This one came off of my Salsa Rustler. This one came off of the Co-op bike. You'll notice that these look very similar for a reason. Even though this says Co-op on it, it is a WTB saddle branded with the Co-op logo. This is a SDG saddle. This came off of my Esker Hayduke, and it actually looks like a really nice saddle. But I'll explain to you why I didn't like it. So let's talk about the most important thing when it comes to shopping for a saddle. And that thing is fit. So when you look at a saddle, you might not think much about fit. Like what does fit matter? How like I fit my bike and all these other things. What do you mean when you say fitting a saddle? Well, we all have different body types, and when it comes to a saddle, we're sitting on here, and most of our body weight is on our saddle, and we're sitting down, pedaling, and riding a lot. We'll talk about dropper post, seat height, and all of that stuff later. Today we're going to specifically, and by later in future videos, we're specifically going to talk about saddle and why you would want to possibly get fitted and change out the saddle that came on your bike. So when you sit down on the saddle, you have these two pressure points, and we call those the sit bones. This happens when you sit on a chair, and you can almost feel them. Like if you sit on a hardwood bench or chair, you can kind of feel the two pressure points that you have in your butt. Yes, we're talking about butts today. So what's really important on your bicycle seat is where do those sit bones rest on the seat. And so if the sit bones rest out on the wider edge of the seat, your butt and your legs and everything is going to be getting spread apart. You're going to be on this outer edge. It's going to feel like your seat is going up your butt, right? And I got to say up your butt on my channel today. All right. If your sit bones are narrower, right, now we have that means our legs are connected and are in closer, right? And so what happens is when you're pedaling, your inner thigh, your inner leg is going to rub an awful lot along the insides of the seat. So that isn't ideal, and this isn't ideal. What's ideal is having that pressure point right in here. So how do we know where our sit bones lie? There's a few ways you can measure this. Probably the most accurate and best way to do it is to just simply go to a bike shop that, a decent bike shop that'll actually have the little padded device that you can find out where your pressure points are. The ones that I've seen, there's multiple different versions of this, but the ones I've seen and used is it's kind of like a gel pack that sits on a bench. You might even see it at a bike shop and be like, what's that for? Because you can't really see what's underneath the gel. But then what you do is you sit on this little gel pack, right? And the gel moves out of the way where the pressure points are, and then there's little markings underneath that you can see, because as the gel moves out of the way, you can see the backside has the measurements, and that'll tell you what your sit bone width is. And based on your sit bone width, you can then turn and look through the selection of seats on the wall or saddles. Like I use them interchangeably, and pick out the right width for you, and hopefully the bike shop has somebody that understands this and will help you out. If not, you might want to go to a different shop. But anyway, then once you have that measurement, once you know how wide your seat needs to be, and now you can go shopping for a seat. So you ideally want your sit bones to rest right in kind of the middle, you know, and this particular model has a pretty significant flat area. Let's show you the other two seats and see how they're maybe constructed a little. One of the reasons why I didn't like this one, not only was it too narrow, but if you look at it, it's pretty rounded here. There's not very much of a flat area. So you pretty much have to be very specifically sized to use this saddle. And so I'm sure if I found a wide one of these, it might be more comfortable, but this was too narrow for me. If we look here, I kind of like this design, and I'm not sure if this is the Volt or not. I thought the Volt had less padding than this. It seems they have a lot of padding, but it isn't marked with the model. But WTB has a few different models, and depending on the one, it has a different shape, or it's mostly about the amount of padding. So we'll talk about the padding in a minute, but one of the things I do like about this design is look at how much area there is here. So you can kind of get away with a little bit of range as long as you don't get too narrow to where your legs are rubbing on the inside here, right? But it tends to be more comfortable because of these flat areas. Notice that all of these saddles do have a channel down the middle, as does this one, and some of them have cutouts. This one does not, right? But it probably has a little bit of flex to it. This one actually has a channel in the middle that's underneath, so when there is pressure on there, it has a little more give to it than normal. And so does this one, but you can notice the material's a little different. I'm assuming whatever they spec this one with for the REI bikes is different than what they spec this one with, even though it's the same shape. All right, now let's take a look at the Ergon saddle on my. So compare this one to this one. Notice how the channel is much deeper on the Ergon saddle. And I know visually this doesn't look any narrower, but it actually is, and it's really hard to show that on the phone, so I decided not to show it. But this one is about a centimeter narrower. But yeah, the channel is much deeper and reduces pressure in an area I don't need to really describe to you because it's pretty obvious, right? So I really like the deeper channel, and everybody's body is different again, so maybe a channel like this might be fine, but I definitely like the deeper channel. So this saddle, which is on my Esker, is way more comfortable than this one. It's actually got a higher quality foam, and let's talk about that also. So we've talked about width, how important that is, and that is the most important thing. Then we've talked about the channel. Now let's talk about the padding and what's inside here. When you get into cheaper saddles, which is generally what comes stock on bikes, you know, like this might be, if you found this in the store, it might be $30 or something like that. But then you get into seats that are more like in the $50 range. I generally don't like to spend in that price range. I generally like to get up into closer into the $70 range, and the reason for that is you start to get into better materials in the foam or gel foam combo, and I don't really know exactly. Every company has different technologies and things they brag about, but when you get into the higher end ones, the more expensive ones, and that's generally $75 to $100. I actually spend up to $150. These I believe I found for $125. I have a WTB Volt titanium saddle in wide, which is very similar to these, but wider with titanium rails and a better padding, and that was $150. So when you get into the pricier saddles, you actually get into a better material that's built inside. The other thing I've noticed is they generally have better tougher protection on the outer edges, so if you crash or something, you don't just destroy your seat. And so I generally like to spend more money. This is one of the parts on bike. I mean, I'm kind of ridiculous and spend a lot of money on my bikes, but if you're on a budget and there's one thing you should spend a good amount of money on, the saddle is definitely it. And it's probably one of the first things you should change, maybe even before you leave a bike shop with a new bike, right? Is to get fitted and get the right size saddle put on it. And maybe at that point in time, the bike shop might even give you a deal on doing that, just because they generally do that when you buy new bikes. So yes, definitely spend a little bit more money, get the material. You can see how this one, even though it's not super thick, it pushes down pretty easily and gives me like kind of that right amount of pressure bounce back, versus something like this, which is really firm and hard and doesn't really press down that much, right? And then this, which is like too thick and too soft. So why do I not recommend too thick and too soft? Because there's this common misconception with people, especially if they're not serious cyclists or just getting into it, that they think they need this super wide, super cushy, thick padded saddle like you'd find on a beach cruiser or something like that. Well, you don't really want a big padded saddle. There's a few issues with those. One is movement. When you pedal, you're going to be moving around. I'm actually dancing a little bit, right? Your, sit bones are going to move from side to side. You actually gel around a little bit like this. You'll actually be able to go up and down. You might not notice those things, and that's not very good for your riding characteristics, especially if you're going long distances. You want to be pretty solidly stable on your bike. You want to press into the saddle, have that fit right, and you want to stay there. You don't want to be moving all over. So if you sit on a seat and it's like moving all over and you're doing this dance on there, it's too soft, right? So the other reason why you don't want a saddle like that is you sink kind of down into it. Think of all the rubbing that's going on and the heat that's going to be generated, your inner thighs, your butt cheeks, everything. And you're going to just generate a lot of heat, and it is going to get uncomfortable really fast. It doesn't even have to be hot out. You get some kind of rubbing like that going on, and it isn't comfortable. So you don't want a big padded seat. It works fine on a beach cruiser or a bike that you're not like going tons of miles on, and you're just comfortably cruising to the grocery store or whatever, fine, have at it. But for serious riding where you're doing 20, 25, 30, 50 miles, 100 mile, whatever distance you do, you want a really good quality saddle with the proper amount of padding, which is usually going to be less padding but relatively firm. And again, everybody's got different body types, different weights, all that stuff. I'm around 190 pounds, so I can get away with a saddle that isn't super firm, and so on and so forth. So there you have it. Hopefully this video helps you. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Subscribing will get more of this kind of content from my channel to you in your feed, because I'm going to talk about other things related to setting up your bike. We're going to talk about the cockpit pretty soon. We're going to talk about the contact points. The saddle is one of them, but the two other ones are your pedals and your grips and your handlebars. So all of that's really important when it comes to setting up your bike. I appreciate your support for my channel. Peace.